Welcome to Global Trends. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The United States Supreme Court is now the final arena for a monumental legal and economic battle. At the heart of this conflict are the sweeping trade tariffs enacted by President Donald Trump. These tariffs have reshaped global commerce and impacted nearly every American household. Now their very legality is in question. A potential government liability of up to $1 trillion hangs in the balance, threatening to disrupt the nation's finances. The core issue: did President Trump have the authority to impose these import taxes under existing law? Lower courts have already ruled against the administration, setting up a constitutional showdown. The government is urgently asking the Supreme Court to intervene. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warns that an unfavorable ruling could force the U.S. to refund every dollar collected, causing massive disruption. As of late August 2025, over $72 billion has already been collected from importers. Projections show the total liability could reach $1 trillion by June 2026 if the tariffs are deemed illegal. This case pits the executive branch's desire for broad trade authority against the judiciary's role in interpreting the law. For businesses and consumers, the outcome will influence the prices of countless goods and the stability of the U.S. economy. The Supreme Court's decision will define the economic landscape for years to come and clarify the balance of power in American government. The tariffs at the center of this legal storm were born from President Trump's belief in reciprocal trade. He argued that other countries were taking advantage of the U.S. with unfair practices, justifying new taxes on imports. The administration used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a 1977 law granting the president authority to regulate international commerce during a national emergency. The Trump team claimed persistent trade deficits and unfair practices constituted such an emergency. Critics questioned whether IEPA was ever meant for such sweeping trade changes. The new tariffs were applied to goods from nearly every country, covering almost 70% of all U.S. imports. If the courts strike them down, that figure would drop to just 16%. For the administration, tariffs were a tool to pressure other nations and protect American industries. The funds flowed directly into the U.S. Treasury, offsetting federal spending. Supporters saw them as leveling the playing field for American workers. Critics called them a tax on consumers, raising costs and disrupting supply chains. This fundamental disagreement over impact and legality is now before the Supreme Court. The legal battle began in specialized trade courts, as importers and business groups challenged the president's authority. They argued IEPA does not give the president power to levy taxes, a role reserved for Congress. In May 2025, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that most of Trump's tariffs exceeded presidential authority under IEPA. The court agreed the president had overstepped by using emergency powers to impose broad taxes. The administration appealed, but the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit upheld the lower court's ruling in September 2025. The courts consistently found the president had gone too far, creating a constitutional crisis. Now the administration is making a final appeal to the Supreme Court. The appeals court paused its ruling until October 14, 2025, giving the administration a brief window to get the case on the Supreme Court's docket. During this period, tariffs remain in effect, and the government continues to collect them. But the legal foundation for the president's trade policy has crumbled in the lower courts. Everything now depends on whether the 9 justices will uphold or dismantle it. The stakes: presidential power, congressional authority, and billions in tariffs. The outcome will set a precedent for future trade policy battles. As of September 10, 2025, the Trump administration is racing against the clock. After losing in the appeals court, government lawyers are urgently preparing their Supreme Court appeal, requesting an expedited process. Every day of legal uncertainty adds millions to the potential refund owed to importers. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent estimates the government could owe between $750 billion and $1 trillion if forced to refund all tariffs. The administration is exploring backup plans, including using Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act to reimpose tariffs for national security reasons. This shows the centrality of tariffs to the president's economic vision. In August 2025, the administration expanded 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum to hundreds of new products and eliminated the de minimis exemption for goods under $800. These moves, while not part of the Supreme Court case, underscore the administration's aggressive trade posture. The financial and legal stakes are enormous. The administration is determined to maintain its protectionist policies no matter the legal hurdles. The Supreme Court's decision will determine if this strategy survives. A court-ordered refund of up to $1 trillion would be unprecedented in American history. Such a massive outflow from the Treasury would create a fiscal shock, larger than most federal departments' annual budgets. The government might have to cut spending, raise taxes, or issue huge new debt, increasing the deficit and possibly harming the nation's credit rating. For Americans, this could mean higher interest rates and pressure on funding for essential services. Critics argue consumers have already paid a turbulence tax through higher prices. A ruling against the tariffs could end that, potentially lowering prices. The logistics of processing up to $1 trillion in refunds would be a bureaucratic nightmare, likely taking years. The policy meant to strengthen the economy now risks a severe, self-inflicted financial wound. The Supreme Court's decision will determine if the government faces a fiscal crisis of its own making. The outcome will have lasting implications for economic stability and government finances. If the Supreme Court rules the tariffs illegal, it would trigger a massive transfer of wealth from the government back to businesses. Companies that paid billions in import taxes would be entitled to full refunds, a potential financial windfall. But the process of filing and receiving refunds would be a logistical nightmare, overwhelming customs brokers and delaying payments for years. Some financial firms are already offering to buy refund rights from importers at a discount, betting on a favorable court ruling. This speculative market highlights the economic distortions created by the legal battle. Businesses face huge uncertainty, making decisions based on a policy that could vanish overnight. The potential for a complicated refund process adds another layer of disruption. For Washington, managing this would be a monumental administrative challenge. For business, the outcome is a high-stakes gamble with billions on the line. The world is watching the legal battle over Trump's tariffs, as its outcome will reshape global trade and alliances. The tariffs disrupted supply chains and forced companies worldwide to rethink their strategies. Striking down the tariffs could restore a more predictable, rules-based trading system and ease tensions with key partners. Upholding them would confirm the president's broad power to use tariffs, likely prompting other countries to diversify away from the U.S. market. Trade negotiations and global economic relationships hang in the balance. The case tests America's commitment to the post-WMO2 international economic order. The Trump administration's approach challenges decades of multilateralism. The Supreme Court's ruling will signal the future direction of U.S. trade policy. Regardless of the outcome, years of uncertainty have already forced global businesses to adapt. The ripple effects of this battle are already reshaping the global economic landscape. The tariff debate has sparked strong opinions from officials, legal experts, and business leaders. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warns of a fiscal crisis if the courts rule against the administration. President Trump claims a loss would destroy the financial fabric of our country. Critics argue the administration created this crisis, calling tariffs a turbulence tax on consumers and businesses. Legal scholars are divided, with some predicting the conservative Supreme Court may defer to presidential authority, while others expect limits on executive power. The core question: what are the true limits of presidential power under IEPA? The Supreme Court's decision will set a crucial precedent for the balance of power between Congress and the White House. The outcome will shape executive authority for decades. This Supreme Court showdown will directly affect all Americans. It will influence the prices you pay for everyday products, electronics, clothing, food, and more. If the tariffs are struck down, import costs could fall, potentially lowering prices. If upheld, higher costs will likely remain. Beyond your wallet, this case is about the structure of government. How much power should a president have to act alone on major economic issues? A ruling for the administration grants the White House immense authority. A ruling against reaffirms Congress's role in trade and tax policy. For businesses, the outcome brings either relief or continued uncertainty. The decision will shape American industry, supply chains, and investment for years. All eyes are on the Supreme Court as it prepares to decide a case with generational consequences. The final ruling will define the future of U.S. trade, government power, and the economy.